We don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens. Number two, of all the possible interpretations, we choose the worst one. Now here's the learning. First time in your life that you felt hurt and angry, that when you perceived somebody didn't care about you or didn't respect you? Or has it happened before?
I suppose part of the challenge is that the external grid of reality accurately mirrors the inner traumatic grid of so many people's perception, and therefore they would not perceive infidelity. If you experience the world as a traumatic place of unfairness and injustice and that injustice and that shit happened that shouldn't have happened, and then you see a world that mirrors that, then all is in alignment.
Absolutely. And what we have then is a social structure that induces trauma in a lot of people. Therefore, it induces escapist, addictive behaviors in a lot of people. And those inner trends line up with how society looks like on the outside. So therefore, all this looks perfectly normal and perfectly natural. And that's why I said we have to become like an anthropologist from Mars. Somebody comes from the outside and looks at the system. What do we actually see? I mean, what an anthropologist does is they don't take the assumptions of the culture for granted. They look at it from the outside. And so we have to look at the assumptions of this culture from the outside.
Don't take the assumptions of the culture for granted.
No.
What are the assumptions of our culture?
Well, for one thing, that human nature is evil.
Is that one? That's terrible. What, because of Protestantism?
Yeah. Or human nature is by nature competitive and aggressive.
Because of Darwinianism?
Yeah, or selfish, these are the assumptions of the culture. The assumption of the culture also is that hate is some evil that has to be combated. But hate can't be combated. Hate has to be met with light so that the darkness of hate can dissipate. Rather than fighting. In other words, we're always looking for enemies to fight.
The myth of nation, the myth of national identity, the ongoing concealment of the blood upon which these myths are founded is obviously necessary, because without the concealment, without the myth, you unravel the legitimacy of the power structures. If you say, well, what is Britain other than a sort of an economic entity and a means for oppressing the poor? What is America? Economic entity, means for oppressing the poor, series of myths that favour particular portions of the population and will conceal that fact at all costs. What I notice about popular narratives in understanding a world that seems to me to be traumatised in a great deal of pain is the people that propagate the idea that either there is no better alternative available, or things aren't that bad, or things are improving. Those people want shit to stay the same.
Well, basically, and if you look at what you say about nationality, it's an addiction. Basically, it makes you feel temporarily good. You want to belong to something, and then you end up doing all kinds of terrible things. And so if you look at the phenomenon like the First World War, this mass slaughter, to which there's monuments to the heroes, in Britain, here in London, and in my country, Canada, in the States, everywhere. What was that all about? Why did all these young people, how were all these young people induced to go and murder each other in such vast numbers, and to do that for years and years and years and years? All because of this myth of nationality, as opposed to an understanding of our common humanity.
Check this. What am I going to do about bringing up these two kids?
How old are they?
My older daughter, Mabel, will be 2. The other night, well, it was last night as a matter of fact, she was tired and having kind of tantrums, so she was starting to cry, and I goes, would you think that you would stop crying if I gave you chocolate? Right?
Yeah.
And she went, chocolate? Like that. She would. She sort of agreed. My wife went, do not give this child chocolate as a means for addressing her emotional distress, which I obviously, know already. But I see that I do not like that child suffering.
Well, no, hold on a second. So do you want me to deconstruct this for you?
Yes.
What were you feeling when she was crying?
Inadequate.
Okay, now, let me tell you something. Inadequate is not a feeling. Inadequate is a point of view.
Sad?
Okay, you're feeling sad. What do you feel when you think you're inadequate? You feel sad.
Yeah.
Now, Is this the first time in your life that you felt inadequate?
Yeah, it's never come up before. I've always just felt really great.
In other words, how far does it go back with you?
Always.
Okay, in other words, you're projecting your childhood onto your child. That's what you were bringing to the room at that moment, okay? And it was so unbearable for you. You had to give him chocolate.
I can't see that again.
Okay, yeah.
Is that what it is?
Okay.
I can't see that again.
In other words, you're not ready to be with your daughter unless she makes you feel pleased, unless she makes you feel comfortable. I'm not accusing you of that globally.
Well, it sounds like it, mate.
I'm saying
we're recording this.
That's what showed up at that moment.
Right.
What showed up at that moment is some pain that you haven't quite resolved in
yourself. Oh no, my first addiction was chocolate.
Well, there you go. And you talk about that. And so what your daughter needed was just a daddy who can be okay with her anger. You know?
Right, you just tell them they're angry.
But not also what Jordan Peterson says. Because what Jordan Peterson says, an angry 2-year-old needs to sit by themselves until their anger is over. In other words,
that's bad advice.
It's anti-child advice. because what you're saying to the child is, you're acceptable to me only under certain circumstances.
Well, that's not a good look.
It's not what you want.
No.
What you want is that child to be able to experience her anger and have that anger be accepted and not get stuck in it. The way she's not get stuck in it is when somebody can hold it.
Right, so I can hold it.
You can actually hold her anger if you're not threatened by it. If you're not taken back to your childhood state of sadness and sense of inadequacy, you can totally well hold that child's anger.
Right.
That's all she needs from you.
Right, to be able to hold it.
To be able, and then if she can hold her anger, then later on she won't need to turn to chocolate to soothe herself. So the drama of the gifted child is by a German-Jewish Swiss psychotherapist named Alice Miller, who was for 3 decades a psychoanalyst. But she realized that the Freudian psychoanalytic method wasn't helping anybody get better because it ignored trauma. So the drama of the gifted child, the German title of which was Prisoners of Childhood, was really all about the fact that stuff happens to us as children, negative things happen, then we adapt to those things by taking on certain defensive ways of being, and then we live the rest of our lives from those defensive modes. So we're not actually experiencing the present, we're constantly reliving the past from a perspective that we acquired when we were helpless and vulnerable children. And when she says the gifted child, she means the sensitive child. So the more sensitive the child is, the more he or she feels the pain and stress of the environment, and the more affected they are, and the more that shapes their lives. This is something I do in my groups or when I teach. I ask people to tell me some recent episode when they're upset with somebody with their lives. Something that they're open to sharing. So it doesn't have to be anything sordid or something, but just something, whether it's your spouse, partner, the bus driver, a friend. Okay, so what happened?
There were a number of issues in my home, broken aspects of the home, things that were falling apart or needed to be fixed. Physically.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And I had hired someone to do these things while I was gone.
Okay.
And I came back and none of them were fixed.
Okay. And your emotional reaction was?
Anger.
Rage. Anger, okay. Anything else besides anger?
Frustration. I was disappointed.
Disappointed is sadness. Well, disappointed is not so much an emotion as a state of mind. I'm asking what the emotions were. What's inside disappointment? Something didn't happen, I want it to happen. How do I feel? Isn't there sadness there?
Yeah, sadness.
So there's anger and sadness. Those are the emotions. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a silly question. What were you sad and angry about? What does that mean that they didn't fulfill their commitments?
They didn't care about me. They didn't they didn't respect me.
So they didn't care about you and didn't respect you. What kind of person doesn't get cared or respected?
Someone who doesn't deserve to be cared for or respected.
Exactly. Somebody unworthy, right? If there are other people here, which there usually are when I do this exercise, I would ask them, okay, we just listened to Tim tell us about this experience. Are there other reasons why this other person might not have done the work that has nothing to do with him or her not caring about him or not respecting him? So what other reasons might there be?
1,000,001.
Name one.
Yeah, he could be in the hospital.
He could be in the hospital.
His
What else?
partner carried one. Could have been in a car accident.
Exactly.
He had a flight delay and got caught on Puerto Rico during a hurricane.
He's got ADHD.
Yeah.
He can't follow through. He's under stress and he couldn't Okay, and any number of possibilities.
Yeah.
Now, of all the possibilities that you've just outlined, including that they don't care about you or respect you, which is the worst one? So let's notice something. I should say we, because we're all like this, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens. Okay? That's what the Buddha said. It's with our minds we create the world. So that if you'd found out he had ADHD or he was stressed, or you might have been sad for him, but you would not have been angry and you would not have been sad. So first of all, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens, to our interpretation of what happens. Number one. Number two, of all the possible interpretations, we choose the worst one. Thirdly, what I just said isn't true. We didn't choose it. It's not like you went through all these possibilities and you said...
It wasn't multiple choice I chose.
You didn't do that. Your brain jumped there automatically, right? Mm-hmm. The question is why?
Yeah.
Now here's the learning. First time in your life that you felt hurt and angry, that when you perceived somebody didn't care about you or didn't respect you? Or has it happened before? And most people I talk to, it goes back way back into childhood. And that's what trauma is. We don't respond to the present moment. We respond to the past. But along the lines of our discussion, it's a beautiful learning opportunity. Now you get to know. Now what if you assumed for a moment that you're the most lovable, most worthy of care, most worthy of respect person in the history of the universe, and this guy doesn't do your home? What's your response?
Any number of the other options which does not trigger an intense negative emotional state.
Yeah. So something in you, I would argue, still believes that you're not worthy of care and respect, and that's what gets triggered. So who's the one that doesn't care about you, and who's the one that doesn't think you're worthy of respect?
No, it'd be me.
It'd be you. No, that's a learning.
No, it is.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying how these difficult things, how these problems are always teaching opportunities. And that's the beauty of healing, is that when you reframe things and you actually see the source within ourselves, all of a sudden, that's liberating. Because guess what? If you're feeling that way because this guy did this or didn't do that, that makes you a victim. But if you see that you're the source, now you're powerful. So whether you're going to hell or you're on the way to heaven, it all happens up here, which is such a powerful teaching, because this is what we can work on. You know, if we're victims of the world, Ramana Maharshi, who's a great Indian guru, he said something like, if your foot hurts when you walk outside, you can do two things. One is to wrap the whole world in burlap, or you can get a pair of shoes. You can see yourself as the victim of the world and trying to change the world so that they won't hurt you anymore, or you can actually empower yourself. And that's what the healing is all about. And anybody listening, I just want to know, it doesn't matter what state of mind you're in, it doesn't matter what you're experiencing, it's human, it is transmutable, it is transformable, because that true self that you got disconnected from is still available to you. So it's not a question of just talking about what happened in the past. It's a question of how do we reconnect to ourselves. And what you're describing about your own state, if I can put it in one sentence, you'd probably agree with me that you're probably much more connected to yourself than you used to be.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
That's the
prerequisite. I mean, that's why I feel the way I described.
Exactly. I hope people will listen to this interview in a very personal sense, and that the discussion with you will help people look at themselves in maybe a new way. So rather than self-judgment about stuff that went wrong or they did to themselves or others, they get curious. What made me do that? They get curious compassionately, because we were all born innocent and we were all born just wanting to be loving and loved. And then something happens, and then it's a hard road back. But I hope that this conversation helps people reconnect with that path or encourage them to continue on it. And then secondly, not to see it as an individual issue. It's a social issue. We live in a society that really does disconnect people. And so it's not just an individual problem or an individual family problem. It's multi-generational. We never even talked about the multi-generational nature of trauma, what it is. We pass this on from one generation to the next, not because we intend to, but because we can't help it. So it needs to be looked at in deep over the generations, and broadly as the function of a whole society. So that the Buddha said that without the many, there cannot be the one, without the one, there cannot be the many. And he talked about the interconnected core rising of phenomena. So we are social creatures, our brains are wired together. So whatever you're dealing with, you have to look at not just the individual internal environment, but also the broader social and cultural environment of which you're one particular manifestation.